when big powers make a move and they influence smaller powers to join them, but when they fail in the mission, then they lose credibility across the board. Sound familiar? Like it's just there's some very universal political science things that are happening in the Sirah that you see around you all the time, right? So that sounds dangerous. Okay, anyway, what's happening on the inside? Well, as soon as they leave and Medina is secure, the Prophet ﷺ says, well, they're the enemy on the outside, but we have an enemy right next door, Banu Qurayza, the Jewish tribe that was conspiring with the Meccans to stab us in the back. So within days, there's the incident of Banu Qurayza, which is going to be mentioned in this surah also. Right? It's one of the controversial incidents in the seerah of the Prophet ﷺ. We're going to deal with that incident also when it comes, because they claim it was a genocide. That thousands of people were killed in one day, like literally slaughtered in one day. So we're going to explore the historicity of that when the time comes. But regardless, Banu Qurayza, a very wealthy tribe, has now been defeated and their assets seized because they violated the treaty against the Muslims. Now Muslims are starting to come into a lot of money for the first time. Remember, in Badr and Uhud, we were starving, but now money is starting to come in. So now Muslims, for the first time, the Quraysh have been weakened and the Muslims have been strengthened. So the things are politically changing in the region. Within the next year or so, 7-8 months to a year, there's going to be the Treaty of Hudaybiyah. These are the 7-8 months before the Treaty of Hudaybiyah. So the tide is already turning in favor of the Muslims, so much so that they're bold enough that they're going to go and attempt to make Hajj. Because Hudaybiyah is an attempt to make Hajj, right? The thing is, not a year ago, you couldn't even leave your city because they had camped right outside your city to kill all of you. But now you're not even staying in your city. You're going to the wild animals that came to kill you. You're going to them. And you don't go to Hajj armed to the teeth. You go to Hajj basically only with the dagger that you're going to slaughter your animal with. Basically, you go to the Hajj essentially unarmed. And they're going to go. If there was ever a time to kill all the Muslims easily, it would be when they went for Hajj. Right? The fact that they go and they go in large number. They don't go in small number. When they go in that large number, all the other tribes see that these Muslims are going to do Hajj unarmed like that to Makkah. Oh, he's serious, man. Wow, that's a show of strength. Everybody's thinking they're gonna come back dead. Their dead bodies are gonna return. بل ظننتم أن لن ينقلب الرسول والمؤمنون إلى أهليهم أبدا وزين ذلك في قلوبكم وظننتم ظن السوء وكنتم قوما بورا. Surah Al-Fath even describes this. The hypocrites in Medina were convinced that when you leave for Hajj, you ain't coming back. You're all going to die. And they love the idea that they're just going to die off. وَزُيِّنَ ذَلِكَ فِي قُلُوبِكُمْ. The thought of that was really good, beautiful in your minds. You thought it was a lovely idea that we didn't have to kill them. They're going to go get themselves killed. When they come back unscathed, back to Medina, what message does it send to all of the region? Muslims are untouchable. They went into the lion's den, opened the lion's mouth, looked inside, and came back. They have basically won the region politically, as far as influence, without ever using any military tactic. Hudaybiyah is a statement that Quraysh have no teeth, all bark and no bite. So even though the Muslims thought it was a loss, it was actually a massive victory. You understand? But that victory, the process of that victory began with the Battle of the Trench. It began with that battle. Okay. Now, let's look at this landscape. We're still talking about before Hudaybiyah still. By this time, the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ was unquestionably one of the most powerful figures in the Hijaz. Unlike the earlier defensive postures, Badr, Uhud, Khandaq, all of them we were defensive basically. The Muslims began to project power proactively, launching expeditions with the express intent of engaging the enemy and consolidating authority. In other words, other than attacking Mecca, we went after everybody else. We started consolidating power, expanding our region, expanding our territory and zones. There were some key military objectives. Number one, to enrich the Muslims, enrich the state. Now we have to have a treasury. Because barely, there were times that, in the seerah of the Prophet ﷺ, Fatima radiallahu anha comes to the Prophet ﷺ and says, I haven't eaten for 2 days, 3 days. And he lifts his shirt and he's got stones tied to his belly. You guys know the story, right? This is not that time. Now it's time to fill the coffers of the Muslims, the vaults of the Muslims with wealth, and build the treasury of the Muslims and build a massive military enterprise. This is a completely different situation now after Ahzab. So the Sariya of Zayd ibn Haritha, and then where they intercepted and captured an entire Quraysh caravan returning from Syria. Remember Rihlat al-Shita'i was-Sayf? Like the easy caravans that the Quraysh used to take that nobody used to touch. Well, the Muslims touched them. And Syria means the when the caravan is coming from Syria, it means it's bringing goods from all across Europe and the Levant, the entire Roman Empire. They import goods. The trading port is Syria, and from Syria they bring it back, and they're going to go sell it in Yemen, from where it's going to go into the marketplace in Africa and India and other places. So they're the pipeline. So they have all these expensive goods coming from the Roman Empire and from other parts of the West, and the Muslims capture all those goods. Elite goods, import brand stuff, right? Now this starts helping fund the Muslims in ways they've never seen before. Now there's a buffer zone. They have a regional control. Now the Quraysh know that their caravans are going to get caught, so they don't go into certain territories where they used to move freely. So you've limited the movements of the Quraysh also in the region, right? And now, how they came right to Medina and they had to be a trench, but now there's a perimeter around Medina. You can't even get close to Medina anymore for the kuffar, for the enemies. So our sphere of influence has expanded. This is important also. There were people that were financing the campaign against the Muslims, conspiring against the Muslims. The Prophet ﷺ instructed specific assassinations of key enemies. They called them targeted assassinations, drone strikes, right? So the covert operations, strike teams, infiltrations, those kinds of objectives. We were in a state where the entire city was about to be killed. That was all defense. This is not defense anymore. This is what? This is offense. You're debilitating your enemy. You're taking out key enemy targets, right? And then 4, retaliation against aggressors. Anybody who came at us that were medium to small size, we went after them. And there are people that had massacred Muslims and others. Now people know, don't mess with Muslims. You're going to pay the price. Now in the region, there's actual intimidation of Muslim military might. And all of this is happening very, very quickly. Because remember, the Battle of the Trench happens, and within a year, we're going to be maybe a little more, a little less, but that's basically when we're going to be in Hudaybiyah. And all of this is happening before Hudaybiyah. So things are changing for the Muslims very quickly. The 3 battles of Islam before this, Badr, Uhud, and Ahzab, all 3 of them, we barely survived. Barely. But we had almost nothing in Badr. We took devastating losses in Uhud, and we got almost genocided in Ahzab. Right? But this is a completely different military landscape. So this is one thing you need to understand about when this surah was revealed. We were already coming into a position of power. There are many surahs of the Quran where Muslims are in a position of weakness and the revelation comes. Surah Al-Ahzab is not coming when Muslims are in a position of weakness. Surah Al-Ahzab is coming, we're in a position of strength. We're in a position of strength. Okay. The Quraysh's hostility remained potent. Still, even though we were winning, they're still our enemies. The Khaybar's Jews, Banu Nadir, Banu Qaynuqa, they also started joining forces, and they still represent a threat against the Muslims. But now we are in a different stage. We used to be in a survival stage. We are now in an internal stabilization stage. And at the same time, the community is being consolidated. Revelations are coming about family life, how to be in the home, the dress code, food regulations, Hajj rituals. These revelations are starting to come that are the formulation of a community. This is not discussions about survival in a military setting. This is about the beginnings of a civilization now. It's as if the foundation has been laid. Now it's time to set up this community. And those kinds of revelations are starting to come in the Quran. Now, I'm going to skip this part for you and get to something maybe outside of my slides. So I'll talk to you about something and I will end today, inshallah. Because the marriage thing I'll talk to you about tomorrow in detail. Okay. Don't look at the slides anymore. Just look at me. So what we need to talk about now is when Muslims are coming into power, the enemy sees that the only thing we can do now is to sow some kind of doubt and confusion and discord within them. I was telling you, demoralize the Muslim. And the easy target for that was the marriage that was happening or that happened with Zainab radiallahu ta'ala anha. We're not clear about when exactly it happened. We do know it happened around Ahzab, right at Ahzab, maybe right before Ahzab or right after Ahzab. It's something there in that time that this marriage happened, right? But it's by the time the surah comes, the marriage is already done. It's already happened. And Allah is commenting on something that's already taken place. Because we know that, what it seems to suggest is that people were already talking. There was a lot of rumor. There was a lot of criticism and controversy, etc., about what just happened here. And in just to understand the brief outline of the story, because you should know the basic outline of the story, the Prophet ﷺ had, I'm not going to use the word adopted, because adoption is actually different than kifalatul yatim. Adoption means you take someone and you basically erase their identity and you make them your own child, right? But sponsoring an orphan or taking care of an orphan, they retain their identity, but you take care of them. The Prophet ﷺ for a long time was taking care of Zayd, who wasn't actually originally a slave, but he was his tribe was attacked and he was lost and then he got sold into slavery. So he's not originally from a slave sort of situation. But regardless, the Prophet ﷺ loved him so much he considered him his son. And that gave the idea of at-tabanni. At-tabanni means I consider you my son. I call you as if I'd call my own son, right? And this is Zayd radiallahu anhu. Now Zayd radiallahu anhu, because he used to be a slave, he's been emancipated. He's been freed from slavery. He's now free, but the Prophet ﷺ considers him his son, and he still stays with the Prophet ﷺ and is close to him, etc. The thing here to understand is the Arabs were a very high class society. And they had high tribe, middle tribe, low tribe, slave. They had classes of people. PhD, masters, bachelors, associates, high school dropout. People have educational hierarchies. People have financial hierarchies, right? People, people might think, oh no, we're in a democracy, we're all equal. Yeah, what neighborhood you live in? There's projects people, and there's the suburbs people, and then there's the bling bling gated community people. There's classes of society, right? People used to have different quality of horse, right? Somebody's driving a donkey, somebody's driving an Arabian horse, somebody's riding a purebred. Is that still the case in the parking lot? Somebody's driving a Fiat, somebody's driving a Ferrari. They start with an F, but they both end very differently. Completely different class of people, different class of ride, different class of home, different class of clothing, etc., etc., etc. Isn't it the case? There are class societies. Classes have always existed, economically at least. Well, the Arabs were very class-based and tribe-based. And even if you were a slave at any point in your life, that label stayed with you. Even if you got freed, you're still a freed slave. Like, it kind of like it's not the same thing, but if somebody was in jail and then they got out, right? So they're not a convict, they're just an ex-convict, right? But the label it really doesn't leave you. It was like that. It was a stigma that stayed with you. There are even pre-Islamic poets like Antara, for example, whose poetry was so good it made its way to the walls of the Kaaba, who was a freed slave. And he never escaped that label. He could never escape that label. So Zayd radiallahu anhu still carries that label in that society, in that structure. Okay. Zainab radiallahu anha is from a very high class family. She's from the Hashim clan. She's a cousin of the Prophet ﷺ. And she's one of the elite families. Right? So you could think of the poorest neighborhoods in Chicago, Zayd,